I like Christian rock. It's very positive. It's not like those real musicians who think they're so cool and hip.
In 1993, 4 young men at Greenville College, a liberal arts school associated with the Free Methodist Church in Southern Illinois, formed the group Jars of Clay. Consisting of Dan Haseltine, Charlie Lowell, Stephen Mason, and Matt Bronleewe, they went on to form one of the most influential Christian rock groups of their generation. In today's video, let's explore their rise in the early 90s and their first 2 albums, which were their most commercially successful. The beginning of the band started with keyboardist Charlie Lowell and frontman Dan Haseltine, who met at Greenville College in 1992. Guitarist Stephen Mason joined the group a year later in 1993 after becoming a freshman in college. The members majored in contemporary Christian music. The guys started out as friends who just enjoyed making music together and were not necessarily seeking out a career in music. As Charlie Lowell put it in an interview with the Birmingham Post-Herald, "We had a lot in common. We each took our faith very seriously, and we knew musically what we kind of wanted to do, but the music came out of our friendship, so we really didn't sit down to make music with any expectation of leaving college early, signing a record deal, or going on tour." Taking inspiration from groups like Toad the Wet Sprocket, Jimi Hendrix, Rich Mullins, and the Beatles, they married gospel music with alternative rock. The band saw Christian music as being boring, stale, and stagnant. They looked at themselves as a rock band who just happened to be Christian. Calling themselves Jars of Clay, they took their name from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. This passage talks about the Apostle Paul storing his treasure, aka his Christian faith, in a plain clay jar so that it didn't draw attention to himself. But it's also a larger statement about the fragile nature of life and humanity itself. The verse in the reading goes, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." Little did they know that their musical journey was going to take them far beyond the confines of Christian music and into the mainstream spotlight. The quartet took part in the Gospel Music Association Song Contest in 1994, which happened to take place in Nashville. They landed first place out of 200 other competitors and soon became one of the most sought-after unsigned acts. Jars of Clay's unique sound quickly caught the attention of both Christian and secular audiences, and of course record labels. Lowell told the Richmond Times-Dispatch, "After we won, people started approaching us and we started getting a lot of positive feedback. We started sending out our CD to industry and getting a lot of good responses and began coming down to Nashville and taking it more seriously. The band was soon being courted by major record labels, and the labels were literally calling their payphone on their dorm floor." The members did admit that they weren't sure how the labels got their payphone number, but the phone calls got to be so many that the band hung up a sign outside of their dorm telling their neighbors that if there's any calls for Jars of Clay, they coach the people on what to say. 3 weeks after the semester ended, the members headed down to Nashville and signed a deal in 1994 with Essential Records. Keep in mind, they only played 7 or 8 gigs before nabbing a major recording contract, mostly playing coffee shops and open mic nights. For the time being, the members put their college careers on hold. They soon enlisted member Matt Odmark, who was attending Rochester College, and he was childhood friends with Lowell, and he joined around the time the group signed their label deal. Their original guitarist Matt Bronleewe left to finish his studies and really wasn't interested in pursuing a career in music just yet. He later went on to become a record producer and novelist, interestingly enough. Jars of Clay's first album was produced by Adrian Belew, who worked with both David Bowie and King Crimson. It's a pretty big feat to work with such a big name like that, especially on your first record. It came about because a friend of the band who worked at their label Essential was friends with the cousin of Belew's wife, and she got the tape to the producer. Jars of Clay's self-titled debut album came out in 1995, and it catapulted the foursome to fame with the hit single Flood. It was their label's parent company Silvertone who listened to the song and thought there was no reason it couldn't be successful on mainstream radio and MTV. In fact, MTV told the group to redo their initially cheap promotional video for Flood to get better promotion on the network, and they abided. By the summer of '96, Flood was getting heavy play on MTV alongside more mainstream acts like Mariah Carey and Tupac Shakur. The single peaked at number 37 on the Hot 100 chart and number 4 on the Adult Alternative Songs chart and number 16 on the Mainstream Rock Tracks chart. The success of Flood could have been due to its lyrical content, which is of course open to interpretation. The song was also getting good play on VH1. Flood was also a #1 hit on the Christian rock charts, while Love Song for Savior and Liquid were both #1 hits on the Christian charts.
I want to fall in love with you. Yes, it's the one thing, the one
Meanwhile, the song Like a Child went #2 on the Christian charts.
I can move the mountains.
As for the album, it went double platinum, a huge feat for a Christian rock group. By November of '96, Jars of Clay's debut record became the fastest selling Christian rock album in history. This crossover success was both a blessing and, of course, a curse. They found themselves performing upwards of 300 shows a year, often in bars and clubs, and couple this with coverage in secular publications like Entertainment Weekly, Rolling Stone, and Spin, and eyebrows were suddenly being raised in the Christian community. Lowell told the Tennessean, "It's frustrating to me to know that there are Christians who think we should only play for Christians. People come to our concert and say you didn't talk about Jesus enough. We never felt we had the gift of preaching. We definitely feel like our ministry is to be real with people and not force our beliefs on people and shove it down their throats." Jars of Clay were adamant that they wanted to reach mainstream audiences from the start. And despite some of the pushback they received from the Christian community, they still managed to win several Dove Awards, a Christian equivalent of the Grammys, for Best New Band and Best New Video. By 1996, the band got the opportunity of a lifetime opening for Sting. Meanwhile, in the mainstream press, Jars of Clay were soon seeing comparisons to Toad the Wet Sprocket, Hootie and the Blowfish, and Dave Matthews Band.
Walk on the ocean, step on the storm.
Odmark told a Greensboro paper, "The songs are pretty straight-ahead pop songs, but it's a little more organic, folk-oriented." The group also utilized a folksy sound, incorporating cellos, violins, and mandolins. If you guys remember, Jars of Clay weren't the only Christian artists selling a lot of albums at this time. There was DC Talk, whose 1995 record Jesus Freak went double platinum, and then you had Michael W. Smith, who was also selling a ton of records. You also had some more mainstream artists singing about God, like Joan Osborne's inescapable song at the time, One of Us.
Yeah, what if God was one of us?
Lee Chestnut, the vice president of programming at MTV, told the Atlanta Journal in 1996, "We've been playing Flood for about 8 weeks. We like it because it's straight-ahead pop music. Whether it's contemporary or Christian is not positive or negative. We're looking for the best music and songs." Controversy, however, continued for the band. They were featured on the soundtrack for the violent R-rated movie The Long Kiss Goodnight, which starred Samuel L. Jackson and Gina Davis. Although the band was in fact included on the soundtrack, their music never actually appears on screen in the movie. Jars of Clay answered critics, claiming they didn't want to restrict their music to one type of audience. The song Flood was also featured on the soundtrack for the John Grisham film The Chamber. Yet despite these bumps in the road, the band remained grateful for their success and focused on their vision. At the same time, the tension between their faith and their desire to reach a broader audience became a reoccurring theme throughout their career, and sometimes it came from familiar places and other times it didn't. The members of Jars of Clay, much like the Christian pioneer Amy Grant, experienced the loneliness that came with building bridges to people outside Christian circles. For example, one Christian fan posted a panicked message on the band's website at the time that read, "I've heard a rumor that Jars of Clay has played in venues where alcohol and drugs have been abundant. Is this true? Please, someone confirm, deny the story," they'd say frantically. It's true, some Christians were upset that the band canceled shows in Christian venues in favor of bars and bigger spaces, with one poster writing, according to the Star Tribune, "If Jars of Clay were really Christian, would they be singing in homosexual bars?" The group's manager told the paper, "You're supposed to take gospel to the world, but when you're successful, they accuse you of selling out. I can either have beer or Bibles, but not both." Well, we're breaking rules without compromising our faith. Honestly, this type of gatekeeping has become so prevalent in other musical genres, and it's not just limited to Christian music. Some mainstream radio stations also felt uneasy about putting Jars of Clay on the radio given their Christian background. Meanwhile, a handful of Christian Christian retailers pull their records off store shelves. To counter this, the band members talked to several Christian magazines to give their perspective, something that actually convinced some people to see their side of things. Jars of Clay also kicked the mainstream group the samples from their tour after the band members used profanity on stage. Then the quartet also brought a pastor with them on tour and met with a Christian accountability group regularly to help keep them grounded. The band also heard from some non-believers who bought Jars of Clay CD and were upset to learn that something they thought was cool turned out to be, well, Christian. Haseltine remarked, "A lot of agendas get thrown at a band when you call a Christian." The group returned in 1997 with their second album, Much Afraid, but it didn't match the commercial success of their debut, but it still sold an impressive number of copies, enough to be certified platinum. It peaked at number 8 on the Billboard album chart and number 2 on the Christian charts. The CD is named after the main character in the 1955 allegory Hind Feet on High Places, a perennial bestseller in Christian bookstores that portrays believers as weak and vulnerable. The album also marked the beginning of Jars of Clay's artistic evolution. To escape the pressures of recording in their hometown, the band ventured to Europe, spending some time at ex-police manager Miles Copeland's castle in the French countryside. The band added more Beatles-style arrangements to the album, with Haseltine remarking, "Steve, our guitarist, is a Beatles fanatic. Plus there's a resurgence of British pop, and I'm sure that's had an influence on our writing." The themes on the album deal with fear and the characters searching for answers to overcome their fear of failure. The album also contained the first song the band ever wrote, a track called Fade to Grey, that was left off their first record due to time and budget constraints. The album produced one mainstream hit in Crazy Times, which peaked at number 38 on the alternative airplay chart. The album also produced 4 number 1 hits on the Christian charts, including Crazy Times, 5 Candles, Fade to Grey, and Overjoyed. The band continued to release albums in the subsequent decades and show an evolving musical style. If you guys want me to cover more of the band's history, let me know in the comment section below, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.